whether you're here or streaming online. Welcome. Well, what a weekend, right? 250 years as a country. It's pretty wild. Let's see. I'm pulling up the sermon here on this fancy technology. But I'll tell you, we're in this sermon series called Questions Welcome. And this question for today was one that I wasn't sure if I was going to do or not. I was both scared to do it and really drawn to it at the same time. Dale Allison, who is a professor of New Testament at Princeton Theological Seminary, he says this: behind, beneath, and beyond the mundane face of the world, and secreted within our daily lives, is some fundamental, magical, mystical, affectionate reality. What do you think about that? Behind, beneath, and beyond the mundane face of the world, and secreted within our daily lives, is some fundamental, magical, mystical, affectionate reality. Today's question is angels. Angels. Who and what are they? How do they fit into God's creation, and what do they do? That's the way the question was submitted and written. And as I said, I was nervous to preach on this one, but also drawn to it. So when I chose it and I was telling some of the other staff, they were like, weren't there other choices? Like, were only a few things submitted and you had to choose that one? And I said, no, I felt drawn to it. I was nervous, though, because I think it's very easy for discussions around angels and the unseen realm to fall into two different ditches on either side of this sort of narrow way. On one side is this ditch, I don't know exactly what to call it, but I've known some Christians who fall into a sort of angel rabbit hole. They start reading books, listening to podcasts. Everything becomes about angels. They start reading things, studying things that go far beyond what the scriptures ever say about angels, but they're very intrigued by it. And I think stuff around angels like this can get real strange, real quick. It can fall into sentimentality or sensationalism real quick. It can become kitsch or nonsense. This is stuff like, and I'm sorry if you do like these, I grew up with them in my home, but this is stuff like Precious Moments figurines. You know, they are cute. They're not necessarily the depiction of angels in the Bible. Or we had this picture in my mom's bathroom growing up. These two, right? You would call them cherubs, cute little baby angels. And I just remember staring at it all the time as a kid, like, huh. Sweet. Yeah, so sweet, so cute. So it can fall into sentimentalism, kitsch, cuteness. But in that same ditch, it can fall into a sort of sensationalism. There's a show, I think it's called Meet the Frasers, maybe. But this is Matt Fraser, this guy here. This is an actual photo of him that he put on his website. This is not anyone else, making him out to be something. But Matt Fraser is a popular medium, and he offers angelic readings. So not just, regular ones, but angelic ones. And he defines it as an angel reading is a spiritual experience where I connect directly with the angelic realm to receive messages meant to guide, protect, and uplift you. Unlike mediumship readings, which focus on loved ones who have passed on, angel readings connect with guardian angels, archangels, and angelic guides who have been assigned to you for this lifetime. Okay? Or there was this book, when I was looking up different books on angels, there was this book, it's really light on light, so it's hard to see, but it's called Light Working with Angels. The subtitle is A Guide to Manifesting, Healing, Attracting Abundance and Success with the Archangel Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Chamuel, Zadkiel, and Metatron. Okay, this is by Roz Place. This is like number 135 on books about inspiration, spiritual inspiration or something like that. So it's fairly popular on Amazon. It's easy to fall down a rabbit hole, almost getting obsessed with learning about the spiritual realm, and lose touch then with being present to the people who are actually right in front of you. Lose touch with what's going on in your actual, ordinary, everyday life. And at its worst, this is at its worst, angelology can become fantasy and escapism. Right? We want to learn more about angels because what's happening right in front of us is too heavy to bear. It's too hard. So that's one ditch. But the other ditch is explaining away any sort of angelic story or any encounter with angels at all. It's just neurosis or a bad sandwich, or it's something that can be explained away purely materialistically, purely in physical terms, material terms. At 42, there was a woman named Genevieve Foster. She was 42 years old, and she had this spiritual experience. And she describes it this way. She says, I saw nothing unusual with my outward eye, but I nevertheless knew that there was someone else in the room with me. A few feet in front of me and a little to the left stood a numinous figure, and between us there was an interchange, a flood, flowing both ways of love. There were no words, no sound. There was light everywhere. Indoors and out, the world was flooded with light. She goes on to keep describing this. And she says it lasted 5 days. And she didn't want it to end, but she was exhausted by the end. She was so fatigued that she finally let go and sort of came back. And she said she's not the kind of person, to seek these kinds of experiences out. Not the kind of person who would do psychedelic drugs to have a sort of experience like this. This just sort of happened to her. And in her community, which was a lot of academics, a lot of, really scholarly folks, she shares this with some of her mentors in psychology. And they're basically like, it just sounds kind of cuckoo. You probably shouldn't trust it. So she says, okay. So she starts attending a really sort of well-educated Unitarian church in New York, and she goes to the minister there, and she says, hey, I had this experience. What do I do with it? And he seems a bit disturbed, and he says, I think this might be a byproduct of menopause. And so she's like, okay, I'm not telling anyone about this. She knew her husband would be really critical of it, and so she just kind of lets it go. Later on in life, she's real sick and needs to have a very serious surgery, and she decides, you know what? At this point, who cares? I'm going to write a little memoir just for my family, and they need to know about this experience. So that's the only way we know about it today. But she writes about this experience, and as she's writing about it, she says, I need you to know about this because this is the most important thing that ever happened to me. tragedy that you can live in a world where the most important thing that ever happened to you, you feel like you have to hide from everyone because they're just going to think you're crazy or they're embarrassed by you. That's the other ditch, right? That we actually just doubt any actual encounter with something that we can't see with our physical eyes because science will just disprove it. On and on. And I have to admit, I'm more prone to that second ditch than the first one. In fact, maybe it was because of my experiences growing up with that painting in the bathroom or the precious moments on the shelves, but I developed almost an allergic reaction to that kind of kitschiness. And it was so off-putting to me that I've, in trying to avoid falling into it, veered and sometimes fall into the other one, where I just want to explain away sort of supernatural phenomenon. But how about you? Are you prone to either of those ditches? Might you fall in the first one, of sentimentalism or sensationalism? Or on the other side, life's just pure materialism anyways. I'm such a skeptic myself, but I want to trust. I don't want to miss out on an encounter with God, on the presence of God right in front of me, because I thought I was smarter or more sophisticated. What a shame. For me, one of the moments that pushes me into faith here is there's this song by Jimmy Eat World. And it was written because they're two super fans. They had these two sisters who were super fans. They were also super fans of the band Weezer. And these two sisters, younger in life, were driving with also their younger sister and got in a car accident and died. And so Jimmy Eat World, they write this song in remembrance of those sisters who passed away. It's called Hear You Me. And it's named that because these two sisters on all the forums, the online forums where they'd write about these bands they loved, they'd always begin, Hear You Me, this band, blah, 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 blah. But it's a song where the chorus is like, may angels lead you in, may angels lead you in. And it says some other things. But it's like very beautiful and gentle and sincere. And every time I hear it, I think about the angels ushering my mom into the presence of God after she passed away. And I'll often cry a little bit, but it's this overwhelming sense of peace in the goodness of the way God has made things, and an overwhelming sense of what Julian of Norwich would say, that all will be well. All will be well. All manner of things will be well, and I trust those angels leading her in. I don't want my skepticism to steal that experience from me, nor do I want it to steal an experience like that from anyone else about the angels. And I can recount numerous experiences in my life where it was something like an angel must have been there. It's not something that I could write out and explain and say, sometimes there's those stories where like someone shows up on their door and they're like, hey, don't go to work tomorrow. A person said that to me. And then, they don't go to work and they tell someone else and they're like, no one was on the door, that sort of thing. Like no one was actually there, but you think someone's there. Those can happen. I've never had an experience like that, but I've had a human person show up in my life and speak to me in such a way that it felt like there's something more than just this person here right now. They're caring for me more than any other human person has ever cared for me before. There was a man in Iowa City, when I lived in Iowa City, named Mark, an older gentleman. And we'd get lunch every so often, and I was telling him about these different programs, these different spiritual formation programs And I said, yeah, someday I really want to do this one, but it's like $8,000, so I'll probably start saving up, and maybe in a decade I'll do it, And he looked at me, and something about the look in his eyes, the little smirk on his face, felt like an angel asking me this question: do they accept tax-deductible donations? And I knew in that moment that he wanted to pay for me to do this thing, pay for me to do this program. And it felt like an angel interceding in my life in a moment where I desperately needed that angel. Then in that program, halfway through, 1 year into this 2-year program, is when my mom passed away. And I show up to the first retreat after she had passed. It was, probably a good month or more after she had passed. But I was, not really there. I was like in this haze of grief. And there, a woman who I had interacted with a little bit that first year sat next to me and gave me a hug. I can't remember words that she said or didn't say, but it was as if the presence of God was enveloping me. And I cried in ways I couldn't cry before that. And I have no problem saying there were angels in those moments for me. Not to mention more times than I can count on my hand where I should have crashed on my bike, where I should have swerved off the hill and, that'd been it. Or in a car where the impact of a crash should have been the end. But it was like there was someone somewhere guiding things where I could live. So I'm a skeptic who wants to believe. So anything else you hear in this sermon, take it with those grains of salt. Because I can't preach about angels in any way that isn't true to my own struggle of wanting desperately to believe, of having moments of belief, but of sometimes hearing someone's story and in my head saying, I'm not so sure. Angels, who and what are they? How do they fit into God's creation, and what do they do? The simplest scriptural answer it comes from Hebrews 1:14, because the writer, he's talking about something else, and they give this little phrase. They say, aren't all the angels ministering spirits who are sent to serve those who are going to inherit salvation? So they're kind of making this statement they're talking about how Christ is higher than the angels. But then they're like, well, look, aren't all angels this sort of a thing? Right? So who are they? Ministering spirits. How do they fit into God's creation? They are spirits. So they exist in the heavenly realm, the spiritual realm, the unseen realm, whatever you want to call it. They exist there. And what do? They serve. They serve those who are inheriting salvation. They are ministering spirits who serve God's divine purposes. That's the briefest answer, anyways. But of course, we got to go a little bit deeper. When we say angels, what do we think about in our culture? Including the precious moments and the majority of art from the Renaissance and some of the art that we had in here before Doyle's art, wings. People with wings. That tends to be the main way, winged humans. And we get our word angels from the Greek word agalos. We get angels. And that Greek word just means messenger. In fact, there's sometimes in the scriptures where it's just talking about people who are delivering a message. It's not divine. It's not anything. It's just they're delivering the message on behalf of someone else. But other times it's clearly referring to a messenger of God, a divine messenger. Right? In Hebrew, it's the word malach, which also just gets translated messenger or angel in the Old Testament. But it's that same idea. So an angel, what's interesting about the word angel is it's describing someone's job. It's describing them based on their purpose and what they do. Right? So it's a category based on their job. Never once is that messenger, that angel, referred to as someone with wings. In fact, whenever an angel is described, when the person, sometimes they just speak of angels, and they may be in the heavens, so we assume if you're in the heavens, you got to have wings. How else are you going to be up there? But whenever they are described, in terms of I can see what this thing looks like, this angel, it's just described as a person, a human, a man. So where do the wings ideas come from? Right? Well, there's two other categories there's more than two others, but there's two other popular categories of spiritual beings described: cherubim and seraphim. And the M there just means it's plural. So there is a cherub or a seraph. When there's multiples, it's seraphim or cherubim. And in the scriptures, cherubim and seraphim are never categorized as angels. They're never called agalos or malach. But our common depictions of angels have kind of mashed these categories together. Mashed cherubim, seraphim, and angels together. Cherubim are described by the prophet Ezekiel as living creatures with four faces. Right? Sometimes it's an eagle face, sometimes it's a human face, sometimes it's... And there's these wheels spinning around them, and they have four wings. Two wings cover parts of them, two wings they fly with. In Genesis 3, the word used for the creatures that defend the Garden of Eden from humanity getting back in, that's cherubim. So it's these guardians, custodians of Eden, you could say. And cherubim were to be carved and put on the Ark of the Covenant. So these winged creatures are on the Ark of the Covenant, and it says that basically there's the presence of God. They're kind of like his footstool. So God is present on top of those cherubim. And the cherubim were to be embroidered on the curtains of the tabernacle. Basically, these creatures signified that two worlds, the heavenly world and the earthly world, are overlapping. They're touching here. And there's these creatures that sort of envelop God, called cherubim, but they're never called angels. Seraphim are described by Isaiah as being a little more freaky-deaky. They've got 6 wings instead of 4 wings. And they're so freaky that they cover everything. They cover their face with the wings, they cover their feet with the wings, and then they fly with the wings. With Ezekiel, with Isaiah, with John later in Revelation, these are all explicitly named as visions. They're not saying, I'm looking into reality and in the sky I see this creature that exists. They're having a vision and they're doing their best to describe it. Ezekiel says a lot, and then John says a lot too in Revelation. It seems like this. The transcendent is really hard to reduce into language. So they're saying, I'm having this experience, I'm seeing this thing, and it seems like this. It seems like there's amber somewhere. It seems like there's light. It seems like there's a sound of wings hitting each other, fluttering. And as best as I can make sense of this, it seems like this. But again, seraphim are never called angels. So we've kind of taken on these categories and mushed them together to create a human with wings. We have no idea what angels look like. Other than that, they sometimes show up looking like humans. That we don't even notice are an angel. Right? In none of the stories with angels is one of them like, Gabriel, hide your wings. We don't want him to know that we're angels. We're just humans. But doesn't mean they can't appear in different forms. Doesn't mean it can't appear sometimes as a flash of light, or maybe even as an animal. But all we can do is speculate and speak to our experience and see if our experience meshes with the God who is revealed in Jesus. So I don't want to play angel police and say, well, your story doesn't match this exact thing, therefore it's not true. But I do think it's important to just recognize, what do the scriptures bear witness to about angels? I want to tell a few angel stories, not from my life, but from the Hebrew scriptures. And in the Bible, what's interesting is no one really goes looking for angels. They don't say, I want an encounter with an angel, so I'm going to do X, Y, or Z to try to find that angel. They don't go looking for angels, but they do encounter them. And I think this is really important. There's a great story about Abraham. In Genesis 18, it says, the Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he sat at the entrance of his tent in the day's heat. Abraham was a nomad, right? A man who left his established home on a pilgrimage to a promise. And in this story, he's sitting under some oak trees. It's the heat of the day in a climate that gets really hot. And there's nothing you can do at that point but sit. It's too hot in the tent, so he's sitting right outside the tent, just sitting there. The father of the faith just sitting there. Maybe eating some dates, maybe drinking some grossly warm wine, just passing the time. He had nothing he could do but sit. When's the last time that was true of you? When's the last time you just sat there? No TV in front of you. No phone. Just sitting there. In his sitting, it says the Lord appeared to him. How delightful. And then immediately it says he looked up and saw 3 men standing there. And so there's this really cool stuff if you play out this whole story where the numbers and the nature of what he's looking at, it's fluid. It's like, it's God, no, it's men. Later in Genesis 19, it says there were 2 angels. So they left him and there were 2 angels. So was one of them Yahweh, or were they all men? What's going on? It keeps switching back and forth in this story. But it says Abraham jumps up in the heat of the day. He sees these 3 men and he knows we got to show hospitality to these strangers. So he gets Sarah to, they bake some food, or they provide some stuff. And eventually, these angels live up to their name as messengers, and they say, hey, Sarah, you're going to conceive a child. Doesn't matter, you're beyond the age for it. This is what's going to happen. And so it's from this story that the author of Hebrews extrapolates and says in Hebrews 13:2, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Woo! Angels. Hospitality to angels without knowing it. This is one of those where I love the older phrase of entertaining angels unaware. That just has a ring to it that I absolutely love. There's another story, right? Abraham, the father of faith, but also we get Jacob, key player in this whole thing. And this is in Genesis 28. I'll read the whole story here. Beginning in verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. This is after he's deceived his father and his brother, and things are falling apart back at home. So they're basically like, you gotta go. You gotta go somewhere. Get out of here. So Jacob leaves. It says he reached a certain place and spent the night there. When the sun had set, he took one of the stones at that place and put it near his head. Some say under his head. Picks the smoothest stone for a pillow. Then he lay down there. He dreamed and saw a raised staircase or a ladder, its foundation on the earth and its top touching the sky, and God's messengers were ascending and descending on it. This translation says God's messengers. Others say angels. Angels were ascending and descending on it. Suddenly the Lord was standing on it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will become like the dust of the earth. You will spread out to the west, east, north, and south. Here's a deep purpose. Every family of the earth will be blessed because of you and your descendants. I'm with you now. I'll protect you everywhere you go. And I'll bring you back to this land. I won't leave you until I've done everything I've promised you. So when Jacob woke up from his sleep, he thought to himself, the Lord is definitely in this place, and I didn't know it. He was terrified and thought, this sacred place is awesome. It's none other than God's house and the entrance to heaven. After Jacob got up early in the morning, he took the stone that he had put near his head, set it up as a sacred pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. He named that sacred place Bethel, means house of God, though Luz was the city's original name. Jacob shows up in this ordinary place that's unnamed until the end of the story, a certain place, it says, this unnamed place, and he grabs an ordinary stone for a pillow. There he has a dream about angels ascending and descending, about the presence and promises of God, and when he wakes up, he realizes the presence of God had always been here. I just didn't know it. So he grabs his stone pillow and builds a monument and pours oil on it. And this ordinary, unnamed place is now the entrance, the gateway to heaven. This normal, no-name place is now sacred, holy, divine. Nothing had changed, but he woke up. Barbara Brown Taylor describes it like this. She says, it was one of those dreams he could not have made up. It was one of those dreams that is so much more real than what ordinarily passes for real, that trying to figure out what really happened involves a complete redefinition of terms. What is really real? How do you know? Can you prove it? She said, even if Jacob could never find the exact place where the feet of that ladder came to earth, even if he could never find a single angel footprint in the sand, his life was changed for good. Having woken up to God, he would never be able to go to sleep again. At least not to the divine presence that had promised to be with him, whether he could see it or not. What really happened? God knows. All Jacob knew was that he had to mark the spot. You notice it in the story with Abraham and the three men, angels, two angel men, one God, angel, three men. You notice it in this story. First he notices these angels ascending and descending, but the point is that then God speaks to him and shows up, says, I'm here, I'm with you. It seems like you start to notice when angels show up as messengers, they're also sort of bringers or bearers of the sheer presence of the divine with them. And so quickly, it's easy to just say, well, the point isn't the angel, because it's not. It's what the angel is bringing or bearing. I want to have these kind of encounters with angels. Encounters where I wake up to the presence of God that was always there. There's another story, a very famous one. This is Moses in Exodus chapter 3. It says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush." Okay, an angel appeared with fire in a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it did not burn up. So Moses thought, "I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up." When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, now it's God. God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Here again, is it an angel? Is it God? Is it that one moves out of the way as soon as God wants to be there? It's hard to discern for these people who are writing and reflecting on this. What is happening here? Something is showing up. In this one, it starts with an angel of the Lord. And only when Moses says, this is curious, I'm going to spend some more time with this bush. I'm going to look a little more. I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I have plenty to do as a shepherd here. He could have said, let me just get home before the heat of the day, drop off the sheep, and I'll come back tomorrow to explore this thing. And it could have been gone. But the moment that slight bit of fire catches the corner of his eye, he wants to explore it more. He wants to lean in and see what's going on. And I think God honors that and says, hey, angel, watch out, I'm going down now. I'm taking up occupancy in this bush to speak to this curious Moses. I mean, imagine if Moses didn't look at the bush, didn't give his attention to it. There's another story, this time about Elijah in 1 Kings 19. Elijah, one of the great prophets of Israel, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came back to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then fell asleep again. He lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat. The journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And if you know the rest of the story, while he's there in that cave, God doesn't show up in all this loud thunder and lightning and storms and fire and chaos, but then shows up in the sheer silence of a whisper. Whether it's Abraham needing a message about conceiving a child, Jacob needing a reminder about God's promises of descendants and land, excuse me, Moses needing a calling about joining God's work of liberation for the Israelites, Elijah needing rest and nourishment for his journey, not one of them went looking for angels. But they all received what they needed for the pilgrimage, for their journey of faith. They all previously said yes to going on a journey of faith. They said, yes, I'll go. They all entered into wilderness moments. And there, in the wilderness, where everything else was stripped away, they met with the presence of an angel, a messenger of God, who gave them what they needed to continue on their journey. In their moments of exhaustion, uncertainty, and solitude, God comes close with messengers announcing a presence that is far more exciting than their own. The sheer presence of God. Early on in the Gospel of John, someone shows up and it's basically like, you must be the Messiah because you were able to say that that was me under that fig tree. You knew it was me under this fig tree. And it says this in John 1:50-51. It says, Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these. I assure you, you will see heaven open and God's angels going up to heaven and down to earth on the human one." Jesus reinterprets this story of Jacob and the ladder, saying what Jacob saw when his eyes were opened to the holiness of that place, that it was a gateway to heaven, an entry port into the unseen realm. You're going to see that on me. Like, you're going to see the angels ascending and descending right on the Son of Man, right on me, right on the human one. Remember, Jacob falls asleep on a stone and sees angels ascending and descending on a ladder. That place was now sacred, holy, worth remembering, because on the stone Jacob had a dream about heaven and earth touching. And Jesus is saying he is the place where heaven and earth overlap completely. He is the place where the angels ascend and descend. I love the story that we read about Elijah because when he was exhausted, ready to die, the angels come and feed him some bread. And there's a very real sense that all of us on this journey of faith, on this pilgrimage, will find ourselves in moments of sheer exhaustion, of doubt, uncertainty, wondering how can we possibly keep going. And Christ says, look, I've got the bread of heaven for you here. Bread that angels wish they could taste. My body. I've got a cup of salvation that's poured out just for you, to nourish you, to give you what you need to continue on the journey. And just like Elijah, you might need to take a nice long nap after you have that meal. And that's okay. An angel will wake you when it's time to get up again. Let me pray. God, thank you for sending angels when we most need them. Would you give us a faith that doesn't fall into sentimentalism, or sensationalism or materialism, Lord. A faith that is open to what you're doing, but that is grounded in your reality as well. Help us to notice when the heavens are opened right in front of us. Help us to notice the thin places, the places where the veil between heaven and earth is torn. Help us to build an altar there that makes sense to the moment. Help us not to live our life just entertaining angels unaware, but wake us up to the reality of their presence amongst us. In Jesus'